Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Emma Sanderson. I'm a senior interpreter here at the Whaling Museum. We'd all like to welcome you to today's Food for Thought lecture. Please take this moment to silence any cell phones as to not disrupt the presentation. As always, we thank you for joining us, and we would like to recognize that Food for Thought program is made possible in part by the MS Worthington Foundation, and that media sponsorship is generously provided by Novation Media. Today's afternoon lecture will be followed by a short Q&A. We have Nancy Newhouse speaking on the art of oral history. She'll be giving us tips on conducting an oral history interview, along with a demo oral history interview with Charlene Thurston. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is, I have handouts that I'm going to give you later. Okay, is this good? All right, thank you. What I'm going to do is to give you handouts about basic guidelines for conducting an oral history interview. And, but I thought first I'd start by just having an interview, conducting an interview. And I chose Charlene Thurston because she's a friend. And also because I know her, I first met Charlene through volunteering for Hospice, and Charlene is the woman and force behind Hospice. And what did we call you? What are you? The coordinator? Or?
The program director.
Program director. And so we have a time limit of about 35 minutes, which I think will go very quickly. So I may not be able to find everything out about Charlene that I would like to know, but probably enough that she would like you to know about her. But so we'll begin. One of the things that I have read is that your character defines your destiny. And I think in terms, keeping that in mind, I'd like to ask Charlene about her growing up in South Boston and in terms of your family shaping your character and leading to your destiny as the program director for hospice and palliative care.
So first you have to get the town right.
Oh, sorry.
Because South Boston was the other side of Boston.
Right.
So I actually grew up in the North End and then in East Boston. And to tell you that sort of tells you a lot, because when I grew up, which was I was born in 1948, the North End and East Boston were more the Italian sections of Boston, and South Boston was the Irish section of Boston. And they were very different in character for one another, as you can imagine. So growing up and a lot of people are very familiar with the North End, is still the Italian section of Boston. My grandparents were immigrants, so they came over and settled in the North End, and many, many other people did at that time as well, of course. And my father actually also came from Italy, and he came here when he was 6 years old. So being from an Italian family really did shape my life in many ways. Very much focused on Italian customs and Italian family values, and we sort of grew up with all of the Italian food, which I still love. And so I think probably the biggest thing was that family was really the strongest value that you had growing up. So it really did shape my life in many ways, still is the most important thing in my life.
All right, and can you talk about your mother, the values she instilled in you? And I know that she is alive. And so talk about that a little, would you please?
So my mother is still alive at 95, still alive and doing well, and finally in assisted living for the past year, but we really had to fight to let her go. But she's great, and my mother was really probably the strongest influence probably in my life. She, grew up as a child of, she was born in 1922, so she was born of immigrants, she was the first generation Italian family. Her brother, who was only 19 years old, served in World War II, and very sadly for all of my family, and probably especially his parents, ironically died in Italy when he was in the war. So he died at 19 years old, and that, of course, really shaped their life a lot. Then they were children of the Depression, and so this was a family that had just come from Italy and had their children in the United States. But my grandfather had worked as a mason, and my grandmother had all these children, was taking care of them at home, and was growing up in the city, so they didn't have any money. We lived in the. If any of you are familiar with the North End, you know what the housing is like. So there are sort of tenement houses in the North End of Boston, and so my mother actually grew up in that, and grew up with many family values, got married, and had me about a year later. And my father, unfortunately, was not a good father. And so when I was probably 12 or 14, I keep forgetting how old, he and my mother separated. So my mother had then brought us up as an independent woman who had to make her way. 5 years after I was born, she had triplets. So here was my mother, trying to take care of me and my triplet siblings alone, with the help of her own family, of her extended family, which really, brought us all up in such a great way, and it really sort of spoke to, again, the importance of family, because the extended family then, took care of all of us, helped my mom, helped us, gave us surrogate parents and and fathers. We had great uncles and everything, and cousins. So it was really great. And so my mother really showed us, what you needed to do to keep your family values straight and to sort of keep persevering through life. So she didn't have money, and so it was really hard to do, but she did it.
Well, I think it's interesting to learn about this, because I know that as a hospice nurse, the idea in palliative care is addressing the needs of the entire family. So I think that that's kind of an interesting thread that has followed you in your career.
Absolutely.
All right, so then why did you want to be a nurse? You went to nursing school. What was driving you to do that?
That was really a very funny story. So then we started out in the North End and the West End, which actually was torn down. That was sort of a bad Boston redevelopment project. They tore down a whole neighborhood. And so that's where Mass General Hospital is now, for people who don't know what the West End was, but that was that section of Boston. And then we moved to East Boston. But in 7th grade, then I started to go to girls' Latin school. And so we used to have to travel by to show you how things have changed. We would have to travel by subway at about an hour away. And I started 7th grade when I was only 10 years old. So you can imagine a 10-year-old or having to sort of travel by subway an hour away to go to school. And because they didn't have the school buses, taking us back and forth at that time. So anyway, I started to go to school there. It was a very difficult school. Girls' Latin school was not easy. It was very difficult, and I found it very difficult. And there was this funny situation that happened in, I guess I was 10th grade, and we were supposed to write down what it is we wanted to be when we graduated. And Latin school was very much academically oriented, but I came from East Boston, and we loved doing our hair and things like that. So I wanted to be a hairdresser. And so that's what I wrote down on my little form. And I had a very straight-laced old maid teacher for homeroom. She was very strict, very straight-laced. And when she saw that, she thought, "Oh dear, you are in the wrong school if you want to become a hairdresser." So she sent me to the principal's office. And so the principal, who was very much more understanding, said, "I imagine you probably don't really know what you want to do yet. Is that right?" And I said, "Right, I just had to write something down." But I did like doing hair. She said, "That's fine, dear, go back to class." So from then on, I thought, well, I have to sort of come up with something else that I want to do. And I did like health. And so I thought, well, I'll just be a nurse. But that's truly what started the idea of becoming a nurse in my life.
Well, that just totally blows character.
Yes, there it goes.
Determines your destiny.
There it goes. It's like something fluky can determine your destiny.
That's a great story. So, all right, and so tell me about your nursing school experience.
So for nursing school, I went to Northeastern University, and they had a co-op program, and I went into that, and that was great. And actually, I found college much more doable than girls' Latin school. So once I got into college, it was a breeze after having gone to Latin school. So I actually have always really loved everything that I've done in nursing. So from my, when I first graduated from Northeastern University, I actually first, they had an associate's degree program at the time. So they didn't have their bachelor's degree program yet. That started a couple of years later. So I initially got an associate's degree in nursing, but had done they have cooperative experiences at Northeastern University, so I had done my co-ops at Mass General Hospital, which was very familiar to me because actually, oh no, putting the pictures up, that's never good. So the co-op experience was great, and I was very familiar with Mass General because when I was 5 years old, going back to how good my mother was, when I was 5 years old, I actually had something called Wilms tumor, which is a malignant tumor in my kidney, and had to have my kidney removed. So I had extensive surgery at the age of 5. And just going back to Mom for a minute, 3 months after which she delivered triplets. So you can imagine what life was like for her, during that time, getting us through all of that. But in any case, I had my surgery and then all of my follow-up visits at Mass General Hospital, so it was a familiar place to me. And I loved everything that I did there. It was great hospital. I had good success in all of my co-op experiences there, and then went on to work there for 5 years after I graduated, before coming to Nantucket. So nursing was always great. When I came to Nantucket in 1973 to start working here, so I've been here since 1973. I've loved working at this hospital as well. A totally different experience from Mass General Hospital, as you can imagine, but with always great opportunities to try to make a difference in how healthcare was being delivered, and to, sort of keep moving forward in the things that we could do as nurses to both help patients and their families get better, but also advance the field of nursing. So it was a great career. It's been a great career all through. And this year will be 50 years of nursing, by the way.
That's wonderful. Lucky for us, I must say. What brought you to Nantucket, and what's kept you here, Charlene?
Oh, that's even a funny story. We have many funny stories along the way. So what brought me to Nantucket was I was, living and working in Boston, and a friend of mine and I just we had heard of Nantucket, and we just thought we'd come for a visit. So we did. And we came for a few days, and we stayed at the Center Board, which is still there at the bottom of Center Street and Chester Street. I always forget exactly what that area is. But anyway, so we stayed there, and one of the first or second time we came, the man who is now my husband was sitting out on the porch with the owner of the Center Board at that time, and we ended up meeting afterwards to go to Preston's. So when we went to Preston's, he danced his legs off that night. And I thought, oh my God, I have found the man for me. He loves to dance. But that might be one of the last times he really danced like that.
They always put their best
Yes,
foot forward
I
they're courting you.
He sort of dances a little bit now, but then we danced all night. They had a great band at Preston's that night that played all of the great old songs from the 50s and 60s. So it was really a funny night. So anyway, then we started to date and go back and forth from. Then we got married. We did get married in 1975. We got married, and so that's how we got here.
So would you like to talk about your daughter, Jennifer, who has twins? I think that's
and
so funny.
And a 7-year-old.
And a 7-year-old.
Yes,
I didn't mean to miss
yes.
the
Please don't
7-year-old.
forget Samantha. She's the
Triplets
oldest. She's our
and
big
now
girl.
Twins.
Yes, but we adopted our daughter, Jennifer. I couldn't, because of my surgery and then the radiation that I had, I wasn't able to have children. And so when Barry and I were ready to be parents, we had to adopt our child, who turned out to be our dream child, because it couldn't have been any better. So we adopted Jen in 1982. And had only then one child. But she went on to have this whole big family now. She had a child who now is 7 years old, and then 3 years after that, our granddaughter was born. She thought she'd have another child, except that she had 2 more children. So she ended up with twins after that. So now we have a 7-year-old big girl, Samantha, and a little set of twins, Hadley and John, who are 4, so that we love them. And they're just right over in northeastern Mass, so we get to see them frequently.
Okay, that's very nice. Now, I'd like to talk about how you moved from nursing into working with hospice.
In palliative care.
Hospice care and then into palliative care, because
Right.
they really are two sort of
Right.
a progressive movement, kind of.
So it's all nursing. I mean, I'm still, doing nursing. I mean, I actually, along the way, became a nurse practitioner. So first I went back and just got my bachelor's degree, and then became a nurse practitioner after that. So in 1982, we actually started, it was actually thanks to a group of people from St. Paul's Church, Louise Wareham, Joan Altruda, Nancy Minus. They are actually a group of women and who used to meet with many other people who had the idea, when hospices were first developing internationally, really, to create a hospice program for Nantucket. So they took the idea to the hospital administration at the time. I was taking time out during that time raising our daughter. So I took 6 years off from 1982 to 1988. But at that time, when they came up with the idea to have a hospice program here, they approached the hospital administration then, and they ended up getting the approval from them to bring somebody from the Connecticut Hospice, which was the first hospice in the United States, down to Nantucket to be able to do a volunteer training. So several of us took that training, and I was asked whether I would like to be part of it, and I thought, sure, I'd be happy to be part of it. Mimi Young, by the way, was really influential in this, getting the volunteer program started as well. So I went to that volunteer program, and then we created a little board, and I became the president of their board, and we were trying to figure out how we might start things off here to have a hospice program in this little community. But Louise Wareham and Nancy Minus and Joan Altruder volunteered their time every single day. They sort of found them a little office at the hospital that they could sit at, and would visit patients and start to see patients who had usually terminal illnesses, and just be supportive to them. So for the first, I was on their board, and we had a board that continued to meet to figure out how we might progress, how we might develop a program and really help it, proceed over the years. So finally, one of the patients that they cared for as volunteers died, and his name was Charles Roth. And Charles had a house, and he didn't have any other people that he needed to leave it to. So he wanted to, because of the work that they did with him, leave his house to what we used to be called Hospice Care of Nantucket. So left his house to hospice. And then we had some seed money to really be able to, develop a program. And by then, standards were developing nationally, requiring certain professionals. You couldn't do it just as a volunteer program with lay people. You needed to have professional staff. And by that time, I was ready to go back to work, because I was about 6 years later. So in 1988, I became the director of what was then Hospice Care of Nantucket, and am still there. And we changed our name probably close to 10 years ago now to a very long and wordy name, Palliative and Supportive Care of Nantucket, because we always wanted to be able to offer the services that were available to people at end of life, to people much earlier in the course of a life-threatening illness. And it's very hard for a person who's trying to get well again to walk through a door that says hospice on it. So we changed our name. We made the decision to change our name and continue to offer end-of-life care, but we also offer a lot of services to people who are trying to get well again from a life-threatening illness. So I'm still there. 30 years it was in January.
Well, I think we're very lucky, and I happen to be a volunteer for PASCON, and that's how I first met Charlene, and it's just amazing to be able to be involved with a person toward the end of their life and to help them, just to be a comfort to them. And you get way much more out of it than you give, believe me. But I copied this down this is from the book Being Mortal. Our job in medicine is to enable well-being. Well-being is about the reason one wishes to be alive, at the end of life and all along the way. What are fears and hopes? What is your understanding of your situation? What are the potential outcomes? And these are things that people like Charlene and volunteers try to help these people arrive at and to be comfortable with the end of their life and to make it meaningful. And I was thinking when I was reading this, the only appointment we can all be sure of having is that with death. And so we ought to prepare for it. We prepare for all our other appointments, and we ought to prepare for this as well. And helping each other do that, I think, is really what a community and being a good neighbor is all about, even if you're not right next door. But I think could you talk about some of your experiences, obviously not naming names, but so many people would say to me, "Ooh, how can you do that?" Well, because it must be their perception that makes them wonder about that. But you've done this for so long. Can you talk about this? How do you do this? And is it depressing? Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, because that's a question that we get frequently, and I'm sure you get it as a volunteer. We certainly get it as professionals. So one of the things that I say to people is that if you're going to do this kind of work, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to make peace with death. You have to recognize that people are going to die, and that our job then, in whatever role that we're in, is to try to help make that as comfortable and meaningful and complete experience as we possibly can. So for me as a nurse practitioner, that means trying to help the person become as comfortable and pain-free and physically comfortable as possible, number one, because you can't do any emotional work unless you can, if you're writhing in pain. So you have to try to help the person become physically comfortable. And then you have to try to help them come to terms with the fact that their life is ending, and for their family, the fact that the life of their loved one is going to be ending, and see what you can do to help them cope with that. So to try to help them develop as many coping skills as they're able to do, knowing that this is coming along, but also try to help them make meaning of this time in their lives, that recognize that this is not a throwaway stage of life. This is a really meaningful, important, valuable, growth-enhancing time of life, even though it has its pain and its misery and its sadness. It's not all physical pain, by the way. Many people, by the way, don't have any physical pain, so it could be emotional suffering as well. And that then when we're doing this work, we go in knowing what our role is, that our role is to go in and try to leave our own baggage on the doorstep before we go in, and be present to this patient and family and try to help them in the way that we can best do that, so that the person who's dying might have as comfortable and peaceful a dying and death as possible, and so that they can have their, sort of their life's business complete. So not only their legal business, but mostly their relationships, that they've said the things that matter most. The things that matter most actually was sort of a phrase that was developed by many hospice gurus, one of them being Ira Byock, and who is a great physician. And he wrote a book called, the four things. I've forgotten exactly what it's called, but it's the things that matter most, but it's sort of the four things that matter. And it's, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I forgive you, and ultimately, goodbye. And so what you try to do is help your patients be able to complete their lives as well as possible with as much reconciled, especially in their relationships, as they can possibly get, and also for their family in the broadest sense of that word. People who love him or her have the opportunity to complete their relationship so that they get to say those things too. So the work has been wonderful work all the way through. The most holistic kind of nursing or healthcare, I think, that you can do, because you really, truly are looking at not only what's going on physically with the patient, but emotionally and spiritually and socially as well. And also that you're recognizing that patients do not live in isolation, that when people get these illnesses, it affects everyone who loves him or her. So you're trying to then support the family and friends through this as well. And in fact, the work continues after the patient's death through about a year or so in bereavement, so that we're able to help families cope as well as they can with their grief.
It's really keeping an eye out for the family, and it doesn't end with the death. But now, one of your very close friends, Pat Martin, had a very tough end of life. And how did you do that? How did you weather that?
It's so interesting that you mentioned Patty, because Patty's anniversary of her death was the 29th of March, and her husband Peter's death was either yesterday or today. The anniversary of those deaths. It's. By the way, I didn't know that you were going to ask that question. It's so ironic that you would ask it at this time. So taking care, helping Patty and her family through it is it's painful, because as a friend, then you're in this situation of seeing this person that you love and care about in the dying process, and then losing them. But I think that the beauty of it was, as a friend then, I had something that I could bring to that experience for them. And just actually had been in email touch, because I had written to her daughters, just acknowledging that this was the time of year for them. And they just sent back email pictures of all of their kids, their whole tribe. So they all get together. She had great kids, and they all get together now. And they sent pictures of their little tribe back. So it's difficult. So in answer to your question, it's difficult when you're trying to help somebody that you care about, but it's beautiful in the sense that you have something to really give. I think so oftentimes people don't know what they can do for the person that they care about, who might be facing that kind of situation. But I should say that although I had a particular skill set to bring, everybody's got something that they can bring, and that's just their personal presence and their courage and willingness to, sort of stand with them in the face of their suffering. So it's really important for people to know you don't need a whole big skill set to be able to help a friend who's facing that. All you need is yourself and your courage to be able to sort of be there and hang in with them without thinking that you're going to magically fix it or let it go away, that you really just need to be present for them. And it takes courage to do it, as our volunteers know. And by the way, I should say Nancy is a fabulous volunteer. We have other fabulous volunteers, even in the audience.
All the volunteers.
She's the interviewer today.
One of the things about being a volunteer I found is that I guess the last couple of patients I've worked with, I guess that you say, they are very, very different. I mean, they're nobody I knew before, and they're very, very different. And I kind of thought to myself, how's this going to go? Am I going to be any help to this person? And, you know, it is really kind of fun that you do forget all about yourself and you just get to know them. And you really can do that for anybody. And they are just so grateful to have a person there with them. Just sitting there sometimes not saying anything, which is hard for me.
I was going to say that.
but or just to sit there and babble on and bring ice cream too. You know, it's just something that they appreciate. So, but when you were talking about Pat and her husband, I was thinking about the Swim Across America, because a lot of families come together there of the patients who have died, and the families are all there to participate and to support them. And so it really does go on for a long time through many of the activities that hospice does. So it's a great organization, and we're just so lucky to have you and to have the same guiding force behind it. Now, maybe, should we ask if people here have any questions for Charlene? Do any of you have questions for Charlene at all? No? Well, thank you. Oh, yes.
Bonnie has one. So I think in the future, the kinds of things that need to be done are just to sort of continue this kind of work. And also, you know, I think that there's no end to the work that can be done as we continue to move forward. So.
Oh, may I just say that I have other photographs. And usually when you're doing an oral history interview, you don't have photographs, but I asked Charlene for some, and I'm going to show them to you now. This is totally out of context. And then I'll ask your...
That's our daughter. Wait. The thing that was so funny is Nancy asked me for just about 3 or 4 photos, and I actually don't have a really great picture of my daughter with my husband and me when she was a baby.
Oh.
But I had a great picture from her wedding.
Now this is Charlene.
And so this is Mom at her 95th. This is the summer at her 95th birthday party. And those are, so I have the blue on, but my 2 sisters are beside me. So they are 2 of the triplets. My brother actually died several years ago. So when you quickly wanted me to come up with some photos, I didn't have everything at my disposal.
That's a nice one, and I like seeing your mother.
This Mom.
And this is,
and
yeah.
Yes. So this is my daughter Jennifer and her husband Dave, and Samantha, our big girl, you can see with Jennifer, and then John and Hadley. So there were 3 then.
That's nice.
That was the summer. Those were all the baby photo, I guess. Yeah.
That's a cute photo. All right, Erica has a question.
Oh, so we made the choice all through the years not to become a Medicare certified hospice program, even when we were called Hospice Care of Nantucket. And that's because of the way that the reimbursement structure works for hospices. It's really very dependent on having a large number of people, so that it's all got to do with the money. It's all got to do with how the federal government reimburses for hospice programs. So we made the decision not to become a Medicare certified hospice program, to stay out of that whole scene. So instead what we do is we offer the services from our staff. So my services and Bonnie's, and we're the 2 paid employees, and Ginny Faria is our program assistant and coordinator of volunteers. So our services are all offered free of charge, and then we team up then with other agencies in the community when people are needed extended services. So for instance, if a person is needing more home care services, we give our services away for free. But if they're needing things like home health aides and other nursing visits and things like that, they'll just hook on to the VNA, and then we can both agencies can be working collaboratively with those patients. They're never, until the Cape Cod VNA, which is the Visiting Nurse Association that serves the island presently and has for the last, I think, maybe 3 or so years, there was no Medicare certified hospice program on the island, and it was because of what I just said. When Cape Cod VNA started to offer VNA services on the island, they on the Cape already offer a Medicare certified hospice agency because they have a huge agency over on the Cape. So they were able to sort of continue to start offering those services here as well. So now patients use either one of our agencies or sometimes both. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, you have to speak up for me. I can't. Oh, the 4 things that matter. I love you. I'm sorry. I forgive you. Please forgive me. And thank you. Some do. Some of them are. As a matter, well, let's see. I can't remember whether Hope changed its tone, and they became Hope Hospice, and they used to be Hospice and Palliative Care of Cape Cod. So some do, some don't. We're actually quite different even from hospices that added the words palliative care to their name. A lot of hospices added to their name. So like they'll then become hospice and palliative care of something. However, most hospice programs that offer palliative care services as well still really are focusing on end of life. Whereas in our program, we certainly do all of those services for end of life, but we see patients even if they're trying to get well again, which most hospice and palliative care programs do not do. So, say for instance, a person who's been diagnosed with cancer, which is certainly a life-threatening illness, doesn't mean somebody's gonna die from it, but it certainly is threatening to their his or her life. So in our program, even if a person has just been diagnosed with cancer, we encourage them to come in and use our services to try to help support them even as they're trying to get well again and survive their cancer, and many do. So we'll offer counseling, support, education. Bonnie offers some Reiki. We offer support groups to them and their families. And even through their cancer treatment and then beyond it, because one of the things that happens for people when they've been treated for cancer is even if they get cured of their cancer, oftentimes they have really bad side effects from the treatments or emotional effects from having had the illness. So just as a great example of that, I told you about my own experience. So my experience was that I had a malignant tumor, a cancerous tumor in my kidney when I was 5, was cured of it, but can't have children. So the side effects of and that's from the radiation. So the side effects of some of the treatments that people have very long-term effects. And so we want to be there for them through a lot of those kinds of side effects and long-term effects as well. Mm-hmm. Do we have an office at the hospital? Is that what you're? The facility. So our program functions as the department of the hospital. This will answer your question in a second, but let me just explain this because it's a little confusing to people. Our program is functions as a department of the hospital. However, we have a foundation, Palliative and Supportive Care of Nantucket Foundation, which is a separate 501c3 organization that does all of the fundraising for our program, so that all of the money that's raised then supports the program. So all of our salaries, even though we come under the hospital's organization as employees, get paid for to the hospital through our foundation. Our office had been in one of the buildings that got torn down when the new hospital construction started. So presently, we're out at Nosh Shop. The hospital has a rented space out at Nosh Shop right now. So that's where we are. After the hospital gets built, and there's also going to be another smaller building for the physicians that are part of the hospital's physician practices. Ultimately, our space will be in the building that Dr. Lepre is in right now. With him, he'll be there as well. But Dr. Butterworth won't. So. When we take care of patients, so we follow patients wherever they are. So we take care of lots of patients at home. While they're still out and about and functioning well, they can come into our office. And if they get admitted to the hospital, we'll work with them. We'll see them in the hospital. Just become part of the hospital's team. And if they're at the Island Home, we'll visit them there, or the Homestead, or Sherburne Commons, wherever they are. And so we actually have developed great relationships through the years with certainly the hospital staff, but also the Island Home staff to try to work together to take care of people there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Charlene,
Thanks,
for sharing
Nancy.
everything, and appreciate your coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for your work that you do.
You too.
And thank you, audience, for coming. And I have handouts now for you. All right. Okay, thanks. Let's see. Now you can read from these guidelines and see whether or not I did a good.
Yeah, I want one of those.
Thanks again, Nancy. We need all of the
Thanks. You did a good job.
Food for thought, number 12.
Thanks, honey.
Sealed shoes and other hidden charms with Chris Manning, our NHA OPED Macy research chair. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.